Now, we've all heard this story again and again. In summary, two brothers bring their sacrifices to God. Abel's sacrifice is accepted, but Cain's sacrifice is not. Out of jealousy, Cain takes his brothers out into the field and kills him. Because of Cain's sin, he's branded with a mark and sent away. However, if we carefully study the text, we find that there is much more to this story. Now let's look at some of the things that are revealed in this story according to the book of Genesis. The names Cain and Abel come from the Greek Septuagint, a 2,000-year-old Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, where their names are written as Cain and Abel. These names are the Greek transliterations of the Hebrew. In Hebrew, Cain is Cain and Abel is Havel. The word Cain, from the root Qn, means to acquire or possess something, which is why Eve, Shava in Hebrew, said, "I have gotten or acquired a man." That's in Genesis chapter 4 verse 1. The word Havel means to be empty, often translated as vain or vanity in the sense of being empty of substance. The Hebrew word for name is Shem and literally means breath or character. In Hebrew thought, one's name is reflective of one's character, and the Hebraic meaning of the names of Cain and Abel are windows into their characters. Cain is a possessor, one who has substance, while Abel is empty of substance. This may seem odd to us because we have always assumed that Abel was the good guy and Cain was the bad one. But this is an oversimplification of the facts, as according to their names, a reflection of their character, Cain is what we'll call a man of character, but Abel is a man of vain. It is a well-known fact that Jacob and Esau were twins, but what is not commonly known is that Cain and Abel were also twins. In the normal Hebraic accounting of multiple births, the conception, then birth of each child is mentioned, such as we can see in Genesis chapter 29, verses 32 to 33, where it states that Leah conceived and bore a son, and then she conceived again and bore a son. Note that there are two conceptions and two births, but notice how this conception is worded in Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 to 2. Now Adam knew Eve his first wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, and again she bore his brother Abel. Notice that there is only one conception, but two births. The Hebrew word for again is asap, meaning to add something. In this case, the birthing of Abel was added to the birthing of Cain. Basically, Cain and Abel were twins. According to the biblical text, Abel was a shepherd. The King James Version uses the word keeper, but the Hebrew word roe means shepherd. Cain is a tiller of the ground. The Hebrew word translated as tiller is oved, which literally means a servant. The word oved is the participle form of the verb avad, and the verb avad is found in Genesis chapter 3 verse 23, where it states that when Adam was expelled from the garden, he was sent to till the ground. Therefore, Cain, who is the older of the twins, takes on the profession of his father. This was a very common occurrence in Hebrew culture. Keep in mind that while Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel are not Hebrews by definition, they are the forefathers of the Hebrew people. When the two boys brought their sacrifices to God, Cain the farmer brought fruit from the ground he worked, and Abel the shepherd brought sheep from his flock. We are then told that God had respect for Abel's sacrifice, but not for Cain's. But we are not told why Cain's sacrifice was not respected. Something of interest that can be gleaned from this story is that we often assume the first commands by God were given to Moses at Mount Sinai, but this is evidently not the case. God gave his commands, or at least some of them, to Adam and Eve and their children, and it is apparent from the narrative that Abel obeyed those commands, but Cain did not. Because God did not respect Cain's sacrifice, Cain was angry and sad. Then God gives him some instruction. The first of this is, "If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted?" Basically, God is telling him that he can overcome this. All he has to do in the future is to bring the correct sacrifice, and all will be well. Then God says, "And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door." In other words, if you continue to bring me the wrong sacrifices, you will sin. Lastly, God says, "And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him." It is assumed by most that the his and him in this verse is sin. However, this is impossible. It is important to understand that in Hebrew, all nouns are either masculine or feminine. For instance, the earth is feminine, but the sky or the heavens is masculine, and the word for fish is feminine, but the word for bird is masculine. The Hebrew word for sin is hata, which is a feminine noun. If the his and him, which by the way are the correct gender for the pronouns in the Hebrew text, were referring to sin, then the correct pronouns would have been hers and her. We can then conclude that the his and him are referring to something or someone else other than sin. Let's take a closer look at the last part of what God told Cain. Here is a literal rendering of this passage from the Hebrew. "And toward you is his desire, but you will rule over him." Now let's go back to the previous chapter, Genesis chapter 3 verse 16, where God is speaking to Eve about her relationship with Adam. "And toward your husband is your desire, and he will rule over you." Did you notice these two passages, aside from the gender of the pronouns and to whom the passages are referring to, are identical? In the passage about Adam and Eve, Eve is to follow her husband, and her husband is to rule over her. In the passage about Cain and Abel, he is to follow Cain, and Cain is to rule over him. So, who is the he and him? It has to be Abel. Remember that Cain was born first and is therefore, according to Hebrew tradition, the leader. But apparently, Abel is attempting to take over the leadership, possibly because he felt superior to Cain as his sacrifice was accepted by God. Also, don't forget that Cain's character was one of substance and Abel was one of vanity. The King James Version translates Genesis 4:8 as follows: "And Cain talked with Abel, his brother, and it came to pass, when they were in the field, that Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him." Now this is a pretty straightforward passage, but it has been altered in order for it to make sense. It is not uncommon for the translators to fix the text so that it can be understood by the reader easily. In my opinion, they do a disservice to the reader by hiding these problems. I am of the opinion that the translator should remain true to the Hebrew text and then footnote their opinions. The very first part of the verse actually reads from the Hebrew, "And Cain said to his brother." What did Cain say to his brother? We don't know. That is missing from the text. The King James translators fixed this by changing the word from said to talked. This may sound trivial, but you must understand that every time the Hebrew uses vayomer, which means and said, the conversation follows, but not here. At some point when the scroll was being copied, a copier accidentally skipped over what was said by Cain. This is the verse from Young's literal translation. "And Cain saith unto Abel, his brother, Let us go into the field. And it cometh to pass in there, being in the field, that Cain riseth up against Abel his brother, and slayeth him." Young's remain true to the Hebrew, but adds, "Let us go into the field." Where did Youngs get this? This was taken from the Greek Septuagint, which reads as follows. And Cain said to Abel his brother, Let us go out in the plain. And it came to pass that when they were in the plain, Cain rose up against Abel his brother and slew him. Where did the Septuagint get the "let us all go out into the plain"? We don't know. Either they were translating from a Hebrew scroll that includes the conversation, or they fixed the text by adding the sentence in order for the passage to make sense. The reason that I bring up this problem in the text is so that you will recognize that there is a problem in the text and we do not know with certainty all the facts in this murder. But in any case, Cain murders his brother and is punished for it, which, by the way, is more evidence that God gave his commands to Adam and Eve long before he gave them to Moses. Here specifically, the commandment is, "You shall not murder." The first punishment for Cain is that he will no longer be able to work the ground. In Genesis chapter 4 verse 11 to 12, we read, "And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength." Now the second punishment is banishment. You can find it in Genesis chapter 4 verse 12. "You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain is so distressed by this punishment and says to God, "My punishment is greater than I can bear." This implies that there is no remorse in Cain and he is more worried about his punishment than the evil act he did to his brother. However, the Hebrew word translated as punishment is avon, which means iniquity or guilt. With this understanding, he is actually saying, "My guilt is greater than I can bear." With this translation, we see great remorse. Cain then continues to say, "Behold, thou hast driven me this day away from the ground, and from thy face I shall be hidden, and I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will slay me." It is often taught that the Old Testament taught law and the New Testament taught grace. However, we found throughout the Old Testament instances where God shows grace. For example, in the story of Noah, the Exodus of the Israelites, and many others. These are stories of grace, and this story of Cain and Abel is no different, as God grants mercy, grace, and hope to Cain. In Genesis chapter 4 verse 15, we read, "Then the Lord said to him, Not so, if anyone slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who came upon him should kill him." God evidently believed that Cain's murder did not deserve death, either by his or anyone else's hand, and this may be a sign that there is more to this murder story than we are told. Don't forget that the conversation between Cain and Abel is not known for sure, and it's also possible that there are elements of this story that have not been passed down to us. What is the mark that God placed on Cain? We of course cannot know with any certainty, but there are some clues. The Hebrew word translated as mark is the word ot, which is used in the biblical text for a sign. This word is also used in non-biblical texts for a letter, as in a letter of the alphabet. In Ezekiel chapter 9 verse 4, we read, "And the Lord said to him, Go through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark upon the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it." In that passage, the Hebrew word for the mark is tav, which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet. That passage will be better translated as, "and put a tav upon the foreheads." In the ancient Hebrew alphabet, the letter tav was written as a picture of two crossed sticks, a cross if you will, and is a sign of a covenant. So it can be possible that the mark that God placed on Cain was the letter tav, and it may also be a sign that God was in a covenant relationship with Cain. As we conclude, you realize that if you carefully examine the texts closely, you will find that there is much more going on than what most of us have been taught. We don't have all the answers. In fact, as you study biblical texts carefully, you will usually wind up with more questions than answers. But this is what Bible study is all about. It's not about getting all the answers. It is about the search. It is not about the destination. It is about the journey. Did you get new perspective in this story of Cain and Abel? Tell us what you think in the comment section below.